Mount Vernon, Virginia, the home of George Washington, is often considered one of the most iconic historical sites in the U.S. when it comes to American history. And yes, there are rumors and stories about it being haunted. Over the years, visitors and staff have reported unusual experiences, including strange sounds, sightings, and even cold spots around the estate. Some people claim to have seen George Washington's ghosts, especially in the rooms where he spent a lot of time. But good old George is not the only one who's been seen. Let's take a look at the haunted spaces of Mount Vernon this evening.
Oh, I love it.
Yes.
Let's dive in.
Yes.
Underwear, alcohol, syphilis, murder, forbidden.
We can cut this part out. But anyway.
Oh, we are recording now, yes.
We are recording. We've been recording for about a minute. So
I'll cut out that whole part about fisting.
Yeah, thank you.
It was real messy, Amanda.
Oh, no. What a weekend you had, huh?
Oh, no, I was talking about you.
Oh, well, yeah, Oh, well, just talking about our ghost stories, this is going to be mine this evening, and I gave 3 hints last time, and they were superintendent, president, and horse. I'll give my sources this evening. It's Wikipedia, a website called mountvernon.org, the Deseret News, and the Mount Vernon Preservation Society. So that is where I have my sources from this evening.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Amanda. And listener/viewer, thank you so much for joining us again, or perhaps for the first time. And for potentially last time, let's be real. So, welcome to Forbidden, the podcast where we discuss the disgusting, the dark, and the disgraceful in our unmentionables. That's right, I'm wearing a thong, and I hope that you are too. This is our limited series, Seance. We're stepping into the shadows to explore the chilling tales of hauntings from around the world. Place your fingers on the planchette, and let's dig into the paranormal with spine-tingling stories. Amanda, this is all you, and I'm so grateful for that because I'm unprepared to do anything except for drink and listen.
Welcome. My name is Amanda Kamada, I guess I will say it first.
Oh, and I'm Blake.
And unless you've been living under a rock, you may know or have heard of George Washington, but I'll give a little history lesson real quickly, just in case our listeners don't know who George Washington is.
Welcome to America.
Yes, welcome to America. George Washington was a founding father and the first president of the United States, serving from 1789 to 1797. As commander of the Continental Army, Washington led Patriot forces to victory in the American Revolutionary War against the British Empire. Yes, he's the one that got us away from those dirty old Brits. He's commonly known as the father of our country for his role in bringing about American independence. On January 6th of 1759, when he was 26 years old, he married Martha Dandridge Custis. She was a 27-year-old widow of a wealthy plantation owner named Daniel Part Custis. So she was a widow at 27, and I'm glad she was a widow because I think that she would have been considered to be a spinster during that time if she wasn't married by 27. Yeah. But he did marry someone a year older than him. She was intelligent, gracious, and experienced managing a planter's estate that she had, and the couple had a happy marriage. They lived at Mount Vernon, where Washington cultivated tobacco and wheat. The marriage actually gave him control over her 1/3 dower interest in the 18,000-acre estate, and he managed the remaining 2/3 for her on behalf of her children. And as a result of this, he became one of the wealthiest men in Virginia, which increased his social standing. His peak net worth was estimated to be, get this, in 2020 dollars, $587 million fucking dollars.
Oh, I would have slept with him.
I know. Didn't they say that he had wooden teeth? Why did he have wooden teeth if he had $587 million? That's
We
what
could
I want to know.
pop them out and give excellent blowjobs on demand as
On
needed.
demand as needed. But I mean, holy shit, I didn't realize that tobacco and wheat farming was that lucrative back in the day. I mean, holy fuck. $587 million is a lot of money.
It's not bad.
It's not bad. I would do him for sure.
Yeah,
Hello, Daddy George.
I would do anything for that
Yes,
amount of money.
exactly. I don't care if he had teeth or not. So how did he die? On December 12th of 1799, he was inspecting his farms on horseback in inclement weather for about 5 hours. He then dined with guests without putting on dry clothes. That's gross. Why would you sit down after getting on a horse for 5 hours and not change your clothes? That's kind of disgusting.
I mean, for over $500 million, I'd be wet at that table too.
I'm sure. I'm sure you would be. So he actually got sick from doing that and had a sore throat the next day, but was well enough to mark trees around for cutting. I guess it
Cherry
was
trees?
cherry trees, maybe. Early the following morning, he woke to an inflamed throat and difficulty breathing. He ordered his overseer, who was named George Rawlins, to remove nearly a pint of his blood. So bloodletting was a common practice at the time. I know, like back in the day, they used to use like leeches and
Yeah.
stuff like that. But he had them take nearly a pint of blood out of him. And then he basically continued bloodletting about up to 5 pints of his blood, and he started deteriorating further. His doctor proposed doing a tracheotomy, but the other physicians who were there were not familiar with the procedure and disapproved. It says Washington instructed Brown and Dick to leave the room while he assured Craig, his doctor, quote, "Doctor, I die hard, but I'm not afraid to go." So this is interesting.
He was
On his,
hard when he died.
yeah, I die hard. I'm not afraid to go. Oh, what a way to go. So this is interesting. On his deathbed, he was deathly afraid of being entombed alive. So he instructed his private secretary to wait 3 days before his burial. According to sources, he died between 10 and 11 p.m. on December 14th of 1799 with his wife seated at the foot of his bed, and his last words were, quote, "'Tis well." The diagnosis of his illness have been subjects of debate, but basically it sounds like he died of like a sore throat and maybe got the flu or something. It's just, yeah, it says he likely died from severe epiglottis complicated by the treatments he was given and the extensive bloodletting. So anyway, it probably, they said, put his body into some sort of shock, because if you had like 5 liters of blood taken out of you and not replaced, my guess is you're probably going to go into some sort of shock. So he was not buried until 4 days later. So think about that when you're thinking about how this estate may be haunted. One of the more famous stories is of a woman who claimed to see Washington's apparition standing by a window, dressed in his military uniform. Others have heard unexplained noises like footsteps, whispers, or doors creaking open and closed when no one is around. Some say Washington's ghost might be lingering because of the deep connection he had to the estate and his life there. So when he was apparently at war, he only spent about 8.5 days total there. So once he was finished with his presidency and everything like that, he moved back to his beloved Mount Vernon. And I always thought that Mount Vernon was in Washington, but that doesn't really make sense because there is a Mount Vernon, Washington, but his estate is actually in Virginia. You can go and visit it. And I would encourage any of our listeners to go do so, because I'm going to get into some specifics of a few of the stories.
Yeah.
One is a man who saw George Washington's ghost there. His name was Josiah Quincy III. He was a prominent Massachusetts politician. In the spring of 1806, the story recounts, Quincy arrived at Mount Vernon to speak with, get this name, Bushrod Washington.
Oh my God, I'm changing my name, Amanda.
Bushrod.
Next week you'll be recording with Bushrod.
Yes. Bushrod Washington, who was George Washington's nephew. He was intent on staying the night as a guest back in 1806. I guess you could do so. So his son, Josiah Quincy Jr., is the one that passed on the story. He said, although he was too young to remember the actual event, and the accuracy is doubtful, as are many ghost stories from back at the time, it was ingrained in his memory because it was constantly referred to in their family circle. So this was a story that was passed down in the Quincy family. So what was the story that was important enough to have such a frequent topic of family conversation? The tale was my father's only ghost story, he said. He said Bushrod Washington assigned the guest to the bedchamber, the chamber in which his uncle died. So they basically kept the room that he died in as it was when he passed away, like same bed, same four-post bed and everything. For dramatic effect, Quincy Jr. explained that Judge Washington, as he withdrew, mentioned the rumor in an interview with Washington had been granted to some of the bedchamber's former occupants. Upon hearing the news from Bushrod, Quincy's father pondered upon the possibility that he might be found worthy enough to behold the glorified spirit of Washington, who was so revered by his countrymen. So I guess people would actually go and stay there and hope to see his ghost. The warning proved to be prophetic, according to Quincy Jr., explaining that during the night, his father did see Washington. However, he qualified that with, "This is all I have to say about it," because if he gave more details, he would have to consult an expert in cerebral illusions. Even though he didn't want to give more information on this, apparently Bushrod had allowed Josiah Quincy III to enter Washington's tomb while he was there. And while he was there, he actually touched a velvet cover of the coffin that was hanging there and that was in tatters. So basically, the thought is because he touched that, that George Washington's spirit came out and visited him in the evening in his room that he was sleeping in. So that is the tale of Josiah Quincy's time with George Washington's apparition, if you will.
So hang on. I just have a real quick question. It's very important.
Bushrod.
Bushrod. Is that all one word? Is it like a first name and a middle name?
No, it's all one word, Bushrod.
Bushrod. We need to bring that back.
Bring back Bushrod. It was the first time I'd ever seen that name, and I just about spit my drink out. I was laughing so hard.
Bushrod Kardashian. I don't know. There's something there.
There is something there. Another lady this time who saw his apparition was Mrs. William Beal and a friend of hers who spent a night at Mount Vernon. At their own request, they were also permitted to occupy Washington's bedroom. In the middle of the night, they were awakened by the sputtering of their candle. They had lighted one surreptitiously and were burning it in the middle of a basin of water. They saw a spook, it went with the noise, and they began to feel alarmed. Mrs. Beal said to her friend, quote, "You are on the side of the bed where Washington died." And her friend replied, "No, I'm not. He died on your side." Finally, they decided that the question was doubtful and there was no more sleep for them that night. They got up, dressed themselves the next day, and sat around until morning, scared by every squeak of the windows, and at one moment were sure they heard Washington's sword clank distinctly in a corner. So apparently his sword, and I think that was his fighting sword, not his not
Not
his
the wooden one.
not the wooden sword. So that was the story. And these are really short, as yours kind of were with the other ones, because they are stories that have been passed down. But this is one that is a little more current. The first two happened in the 1800s. This one happened in the 1980s. And the people who work at the Mount Vernon Society or whatever, they call them interpreters, and they're the ones that kind of do the guided tours throughout the estate whenever people come to visit. So this one's referred to as an angry gentleman, and this is where the superintendent comes into play. So just to kind of set this up, an interpreter was in what was called the central passage of the home on a particularly crowded day in the spring or summer in the 1980s. She thought she heard someone in the room behind her. Thinking that a visitor had gotten into the area by going under, you know, how they have those rope barriers, she entered what was called the little parlor to try to shoo them out, because there's no one who's supposed to be in there. Much to her surprise, she found an older gentleman sporting a large mustache and dressed in late 19th or early 20th century clothing, with his sleeves rolled up and secured with garters. So if you kind of think about like that whole look, like she was there and this person is in front of her, and it's not a person that's dressed up that works there. When he saw that he had her attention, he shouted, quote, "What the hell is going on here?" A reference to a noise a school group or groups were making. So basically, he didn't like all of the noise that was going on in the background.
I get it. School
Yeah,
children? No, I would haunt
no,
that shit too.
yeah. So the interpreter told him that she was trying to quiet them down, and then the man suddenly disappeared. She later saw a portrait of the gentleman in the room, and he was Colonel Harrison Howell Dodge, who was the superintendent for about 50 years until his death in the 1930s. So this guy who appeared and asked her what the hell was going on was actually the superintendent who worked there for 50 years.
That's cool. Do we know what he died from?
No, no. But he died in the 1930s. So he was like the superintendent well after George Washington died, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So that would be something to look up. Another interpreter in the little parlor area had an experience where she felt something brush by her in the little parlor. So this little parlor must be an area where things must have happened. Looking down, all she could see were the feet and bottoms of skirts of a young girl in an 18th century dress running across the central passage. So this central passage parlor area is definitely haunted if you go ever to Mount Vernon, Virginia,
Oh, I
to
want to
see the
go.
Washington estate. I know this kind of makes me want to go. I don't know where Mount Vernon is. My guess is it's probably somewhere close to the DC area, is my guess. I mean, Virginia is not that big, right?
Can we Airbnb it?
Wouldn't that be fun?
Airbnb Mount Vernon. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I find it really interesting that people were actually able to stay there, you
Yeah.
know, like after he passed away. I guess as long as it was owned by his family and wasn't like a historical place, you know, like when that Quincy guy stayed and then the other woman and her friend stayed, it must have been just personally in the family at
Or
that
we're
time.
friends of Bushrod,
Yes, friends of Bushrod.
aren't we all?
And then the last one that I have for you tonight is an apparition of George Washington putting away his horse. So the head guard said that these events were not a one-time incident, but happened with great regularity during the 1980s and the 1990s. So quite frequently, an alarm would go off in the horse stable. Then, and about the time it would take for someone to unsaddle and put up a horse and walk from the stable to the mansion at Mount Vernon, an alarm would then go off in the Washington's bedchamber. Guards dispatched to check out the situation and always found that there was nothing going on when the alarms were happening. This man's explanation was that the general, who was George Washington, was coming home, made his horse comfortable, and then went up to his room to rest. So those are a few stories that have been told about the haunting of Mount Vernon, which is the home of one of our founding fathers, George Washington. I don't know about you, but I really love visiting old places where, like, old historical places where people have lived. Like when my parents were here back in November, we went down to Key West and we went to Hemingway's house, and it's as it left as it was whenever he moved out of it, and they keep it restored. I know whenever I was a kid, my parents used to drag us to old plantation homes and those sorts of things. And I have a feeling, that there have to be more stories about Mount Vernon that aren't really told because George Washington was known to be a slave owner, if we all remember. And I'm sure that there are ghosts of slaves that more than likely haunt the property as well. I mean, if you think about an 18,000 acre piece of land, that has a horse stable, that has the main home. I'm sure there were probably different quarters for the servants and slaves and stuff like that. So my guess is this is truly a haunted place. Those were just, with the exception of the superintendent, were stories of people who actually think that they saw George Washington himself. And most of those happened within his bedchamber, which he died in and laid in for 4 days before he was entombed.
Yeah, so I just looked it up, and Mount Vernon is right on the Potomac. So it's right on the river borders Maryland and Virginia. And it's just south of Alexandria, which is just south of DC. So yeah, it's very close to the city. But I agree. I've always specifically loved sort of like vintage Americana, or not vintage, like antique, like historic Americana. There's something about like the Legend of Sleepy Hollow and that old, I don't know, as like old-timey American shit, like Appalachian folk tales, and I love all of those things.
I love it too. Like, I love going to like Philadelphia. It always like cracks me up when you go to like Philadelphia, because they have like Betsy Ross's house and they have like the Liberty Bell and all that kind of stuff. But there's also so many people like who are in character costumes, like doing reenactments and stuff like that of those times in America, like when the Constitution was signed and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, here's Ben Franklin's house and all that kind of stuff. And it's sort of cool, those sorts of things. And I think that I would actually make a trip to DC and go to Mount Vernon just to see this, now that I was not aware that Mount Vernon was haunted.
Yeah.
As I said, I thought Mount Vernon was in the state of Washington, because I So what I read was that the state of Washington was actually named for George Washington. The state of Washington wasn't even like probably a state when he
Wasn't
even
even on the
passed
map.
away. It wasn't even on the map. It was the Wild West out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Mount Vernon, Washington has nothing to do with Mount Vernon, Virginia, which is where his estate is.
Well, and then there's Mount Vernon, New York,
Oh, well, I wasn't aware of that.
right?
Probably. I mean, I can't imagine that there's probably
Yeah,
tons of Mount Vernons around like the United States.
there is. Okay, I rented a car there once.
Oh,
So Mount Vernon, I think, is very near Yonkers, but I'm pretty sure I rented a car from there once. Mount
mm-hmm.
Vernon, New York. There's so many Mount Vernons.
So many Mount Vernons. I guess I thought that Washington had more of a tie to Washington State because he's on their state flag and everything like that. But I guess whoever founded Washington was just a big fan of George Washington.
A fetishist, probably.
Yeah, maybe it was that wooden sword that he had.
Or the wooden teeth. They
Or
were
maybe
really into Washington's wood.
yeah, into his Bushrod.
Same.
Um,
Yeah.
but I've never had an encounter, when I visited any sort of historical site. As I was saying in last week's episode, I really didn't have any paranormal experiences per se with people until I moved to New York. I did have a paranormal experience in Washington State whenever I lived in Seattle, but it was with my cat who passed away. And I do believe that, things happen to both animals and people, spirits, when they pass. But something that happened was my cat passed away unexpectedly of the vet thought it was like a heart attack or a blood clot. And she used to go outside in the backyard. She would never leave the backyard, but loved to go back there whenever my ex-husband and I bought our house. And she would always come, in every night. And one night she didn't come in. And I was like, something's wrong. I just knew inherently that something was wrong with her because it just wasn't like her to not be at the back door, ready to come in and go to bed with us or whatever. And the next morning, we found her in the backyard. She was laying she was already dead. She was laying by, and this sounds so gross, by the barbecue grill. Kind of sheltered. And the vet said she probably went to hide because she knew that she was going to die.
Yeah.
But for probably about 5 to 6 months after she died, at night, we would hear a cat meowing in the middle of the night outside. And anytime we would go out to see if there was a cat outside, there was no cat. We think it was her.
Yeah. Oh, I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, when I lived in New York, when McGriff passed away, he passed away in our apartment in the West Village. We had to have somebody come over and put him down because he was very sick. And he left this world on our couch. And we had these like Christmas lights that we had like strung up, if you remember, like around our kitchen window. I say kitchen very loosely because in New York, you really don't have a dedicated kitchen.
That corner of the room.
That corner of the room that has a little sink and a tiny stove that's like basically sitting inside of your living area. But those lights, after he passed away, it was always the blue lights. They would flash. And I would talk to them and I would say, McGriff, is this you? And the lights would flash. and I would actually, have conversations with them. It was never a red light. It was never a green light, yellow lights. It was always the blue lights. And they didn't do it all the time. They would do it sporadically. But if I talked to them, they would actually flash on and off. So I do believe that it was McGriff because his spirit left in that apartment whenever he passed away.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are two of my instances where it was someone who passed away, kind of like George Washington did, like on a property, and their spirit stayed then afterwards.
Yeah,
It
like
just
after
happens to
home.
be it just happens to be animal related as opposed to human related.
But at home at the place they loved, it was familiar to them. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I often wonder, like when we moved, if he came with us or if he stayed there,
Mm.
because I haven't really seen any indications that he's around, um, except for every once in a while, which is incredibly rare in Miami because it is so warm here. I will see a Bernese mountain dog out of nowhere. And when I do, I always feel like it's him, kind of giving me a, hello from wherever he is, because it is
Yeah.
so rare to see them here.
I don't feel like he would stay. Not
Yeah.
necessarily that he would follow, but maybe he would have just moved on.
Mhm.
But I feel like if you left, he wouldn't have stayed. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Right. Right. Unfortunately, his and Maggie's ashes are in storage in someplace in New Jersey somewhere, because we still have stuff in that area of the country, and their ashes didn't come with us because we didn't know that we were staying down in South
Yeah.
Florida. So he may be just hanging out in a storage facility somewhere in Jersey right now.
Lots of interesting smells,
Yes.
lots of things to play with in the adjoining units,
Yes.
probably. Maybe a
Yes.
dead body here and there.
Yeah. Now, I do have two more ghost stories that I'm going to talk about that both happened in New York, but I'm going
Okay.
to wait till my next episode to talk about that because I'm going to try to do something that's more related. But I thought that those were really interesting because they kind of went with the same theme of George Washington staying at his home space.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any stories of animals or anything like that that maybe have followed you around or come to you in your dreams even?
No, nothing that won't make me cry.
Oh no.
Just I just had the one. I had Ginger for almost 17 years, and that was a sad story.
Yeah, I don't want you to have to get into that. That was a sad
Yeah,
story.
let's not do that one right now.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, she still is on my mind. I think about Ginger to this day, and she died April 13th, 2007. It was a Friday the 13th. I won't get into it, but
Wow, I can't believe that you actually remember the date that she passed away. Although
it
I do
was,
remember when McGriff passed away too, and I remember when Maggie passed away, but it was because I had to put both of them down. And so, whenever you have to plan for that, it is awful.
yeah,
So I won't get into it.
yeah. Mine was unplanned and very traumatic for me.
Right, right. Yeah.
But I
Speak.
loved that story.
Yeah.
And I love that you went deeper. Like because my story last week was early 1900s, and I really do love like 1700s, 1800s America. America.
America.
But yeah, that was fun.
I couldn't believe that like he was like 67 when he passed away, which was actually
Pretty
pretty
good.
old for back. In that day,
Yeah.
And I just really had no idea that daddy was so rich. I mean,
Yeah.
daddy. I mean, no wonder they had a nephew named Bushrod, like swinging dicks, big money, tobacco, and wheat.
Yeah.
But speaking of Washington, what a week with that plane crash, right?
The plane crash, among other things. There's a lot going on in Washington right now.
Yeah, a lot going on in Washington. But that plane crash was wild. I mean, our thoughts and, I don't pray, but good thoughts go out to all of those who passed away. I just don't understand, and no one is going to be able to explain to me how a military helicopter is allowed to fly that near an actual airport doing a training exercise when there are civilians flying in and out of that airport. Now, I've never flown into Reagan National Airport.
I
As
have.
I've told you before, I have never been to Washington, D.C.
I have.
And, but from what I understand, it's a pretty small, tightly fit in airport. And
It
why
is.
in God's name was anyone doing a training exercise there? I put this one solely on the Army. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah. Do you know about the other things that you know about the plane in Philadelphia that went down?
Yes.
And
Yes.
then the one here in Phoenix that there's almost a collision here in Phoenix the week
Oh, you're ki
before.
oh, you're kidding me. I did not hear about the one in Phoenix.
Yeah, lots of weird things happening with the FAA right now,
Mhm. And it's not just Boeing's fault.
for once.
For once. Yes, yes. Boeing's probably like, like
Right.
it's taking the heat
The
off of
heat's
them
off.
off for a minute. And I find it very horrible that Trump like went and blamed like all of this on like DEI initiatives and stuff like that. The of what happened in this with this plane in Washington D.C. Whether it be the fault of the pilots of the helicopter or the air traffic controllers. He all of a sudden, like in his first conference, blamed or DEI initiative. Sorry, I've got like a bug flying around me. I must
They're
stink
here
or
too.
something. Oh,
It's that
God.
time of year down here where it's starting to get warm.
Yes. Um, which was pretty disgusting given that, we don't know exactly what happened. But I don't blame the pilot of the aircraft, the helicopter. I blame the Army for doing a training exercise during that. That should not happen in airspace at night, especially. So I don't know. I think that shouldn't be allowed. What happened in Phoenix?
There
It
were
sounds,
two flights that
yeah.
came commercial. Wait, commercial flight, is that right? That's one where it's got all the people on it.
Oh, yeah. The big ones.
They came within 1,000 feet of each other, and airlines are not supposed to come within a mile of one another.
Mhm.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
Quote me on it. Test me. Try me.
Yes.
Um, but they were at different elevations, so I don't think they could like visualize each other.
Mhm.
But there's recording of the air traffic control telling them like descend, descend, because
Oh
they
my
were
god.
getting too close. But it's like I don't know. It's just weird, and maybe these things happen more frequently than we know, and just the fact that all this is a relevant topic right now because of that crash, because of the Philadelphia thing, and
Mhm.
because of all of the changes that are happening in Washington. Maybe we're just suddenly more alert and aware of them.
Mhm.
But it is disconcerting either way.
Yeah, it doesn't make me wanna fly right now, I'll tell you that much.
Right. And I just booked my flight to come see you.
I know. I
So
know.
hopefully I
May
make it.
They'll work out the kinks before April, don't worry about it.
Well, not all the kinks. I like some of the kinks.
Yeah, some of the kinks on the flight can
Yeah,
can
we'll keep
stay.
those. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll keep those for me.
Speaking of transportation, it seems as though you're having some issues with your own.
Oh my God. You're never going to believe this.
Okay.
This is so ridiculous. This weekend was nuts for my car. I have got a Nissan Sentra. It's a 2018, top of the line for me. You know what I mean? And so our neighbors over here had to cut down a tree, like a really large tree. It was a beautiful tree. It was messy in our yard, but whatever. That's a different story. They had to cut it down. So it was a bummer. It was like getting into the root, into their sewer line. The roots were.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So I don't blame them. They had to do it. But suddenly our backyard just feels naked. So like, let's go look at trees. We fucking love planting new trees in our yard.
You guys love a plant, I'll tell you that.
We sure do. So we went out to look for one on Saturday. On that drive, we had a flat, and
You
it just
always have flats in that fucking car, man. Like, is it just from construction going on there? Is it normally like
well, this was on like city streets, so I don't know
Mhm.
what it was from, but we luckily it happened right next to a tire shop. They probably put like through nails out, like cast nails into
Yeah.
the street, like, oh, here comes our last rush of the day.
Yeah.
Um,
It's the end of the month. We got to make
quota,
quota. Yeah.
still quota. So yeah, so we were able to just turn right in, and it was the end of the day, so it was a rush. So anyway, got tire replacement. The next day, it's been lovely here, like mid to upper 70s. Today was 80. So we load Tilda up. We go have brunch. We sat on a patio, had a beer and a sandwich. And then Josh was like, let's go look at look at some homes around here that have done nice landscapes, get some ideas for our yard. So we start leaving, and we realize the car is out of windshield wiper fluid. So he says, let's stop into the gas station. I'll buy a jug, a gallon or whatever.
Mhm.
Buy a jug of windshield wiper fluid. So I'm sitting there in the car, and I'm watching him unscrew the cap. And I was like, that looks like a different cap than the one that I know. Because the windshield
Oh.
wiper fluid cap is white, and the one he had in his hand was dark. And so I leaned out of the car, and I was like, do you need a hand? And he did not answer. And then I see a just splash, just like maybe a couple teaspoons of windshield wiper fluid go into that container.
Is it oil?
And then he stopped. And then I see him move to another part of the thing, and he unscrewed the white cap and then filled up that cap. And I was like, oh my God, what did he do? And then he's like shoving napkins in. Like he ran back into the gas station, came out with a bunch of napkins, and like was shoving them into the thing to try and soak up what he had put in.
Oh no.
And then he's like cursing and slamming things. He gets in the car and he poured it into the brake fluid container.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no.
So and he dropped that cap into somewhere into the thing. So we just had to drive back home. We didn't get to go look at the houses like we wanted to. We drove back home because AAA was closed. He has a AAA membership. And he was upset, like with himself.
Yeah.
And so I made him have a glass of wine when we got home to calm down. And we sat out and did like a fire pit and like had a little zen period. But the gas or the brake line he got for a discount. It was like $90 to refill it. It's not terrible. But the missing gas cap or the missing cap for that thing cost an extra $100.
For a cap?
Yeah.
That's
I have
so stupid.
I have not told him yet because they
Oh
called
no.
me to tell me.
Uh-huh.
So that's fun.
Hmm.
So that was my past couple days.
Yes, yes. I spent my weekend getting acquainted with my new old car. So
Did
I'm
you go for a
driving.
spin?
Yeah, I took it for a spin. I took it for a spin, took it to brunch.
Oh,
I took it over to Wynwood and had brunch. I've been driving it this week, actually. Whoever had it before me took really good care of it. It doesn't have a fucking scratch on it. It's
Back
crazy.
in the high life again.
Yes, back in the high life. So, yeah, we'll see. It does have some cosmetic things in the interior that I have to address, but
Don't we all?
yeah, yeah. I've got a lot of stuff going on in the interior that I need to take care of.
Same. That's what poppers are for.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so do you have anything else, or should we wrap this one up?
Let's
Any,
wrap it up with a condom. Let's all be safe.
yes, stay out of airplanes for maybe a day or two. You know what's so crazy about that thing happening in Philadelphia so closely to the other one is normally when a tragedy happens like that, they say that you're more likely to get hit by lightning than, yeah, I mean, like air travel is supposed to be like the safest thing. So whenever a big crash like that happens, the likelihood of you being in another crash is depleted by a certain percentage. And then within like 3 or 4 days, that thing in Philadelphia happened. That's when or when a helicopter hits your plane, that's when your time is up.
I hope there's not another one for like 3 or 4 months because I'm coming to see you early April
Yes.
for our
We
photo shoot.
we have a photo shoot to plan for,
We sure do.
which we can talk about a little bit maybe after this.
Yeah.
But in
Listeners
the
don't
meantime, yeah, the listeners don't need to know.
what
But
they do need to know.
in the meantime, why don't you tell them where they can continue to listen to this wonderful banter of ours?
Exactly where you're listening to it right now, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. You can follow along on social media if we ever decide to post there again on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. And
All
then
at the Forbidden Pod.
all at the Forbidden Pod. Thank you. And you can also just catch out. That's not even a thing. I just made that up. You can catch out if you want to over at theforbiddenpod.com. We have sassy photos. We've got a whole back catalog of content that you probably don't even know about. And then, we want to hear from you. We want to see your nudes. We
We
really want to
prefer
see.
those.
We prefer them. We want to see dick pics.
We want to see your Bushrod.
We want to see buttholes and bushrods. Email your high resolution JPEGs to hello@theforbiddenpod.com.
Bushrod. Sorry, it's just, I can't stop with it.
I'm changing my name, Amanda.
Bushrod Roberts.
Yeah, got a ring to it.
It does have a ring to it. Well,
My
thank
teeth
you.
are purple from this wine.
They're like George Washington's wooden teeth.
I'm gonna need some of those soon.
Well, Blake, thank you so much for listening to my ghost stories this evening.
Thanks for the memories. I loved your titillating tales of the supernatural and wooden teeth.
And listeners, as always, we thank you.
Thank you.